Nike Gucci. Kid, we going out on this motherfucker.
Anytime that we in VIP, they say the zoo in town. Turkey seller fences going wild, yeah, doing clowns. Monkey niggas talking shit, I can make them see. Have my Africans eat his face like he's some bushmeat. Animals, we animals, nah, we ain't playing fair. Dog show, got 20 pretty bitches prancing over here, sweating like a dog, oh, and I need my H2O. I'ma grab your ass and keep you good before the night is over. We gon' need about 30 bottles, jungle juice is going on. Sharamo and Rose, women, whatever they pouring on. Bite that pill and tranquilize. Now they got that monkey loose. She fuck gorillas, we gorillas, then you and your monkey crew. I'm going, 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 I'm going,
What hair looks like after slavery. Transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade by the European changes everything for Central and West Africans. Let's briefly talk about the transatlantic slave trade. The Portuguese and later the English, the French, and the Dutch got involved in enslaving Africans in large parts of West Africa, the Gulf Coast of Guyana, and the Congo River Basin were significant areas of human exports to the Americas, mostly to sugar plantations in the Caribbean. By the late 17th century, the so-called triangle trade developed. European ships loaded with guns, textiles, tobacco, and manufacturing goods sailed to Africa slave ports and traded those goods for captives. European slave traders then took those Africans to the New World where they were sold. With that money, the European purchased staples such as sugar, tobacco, rum, and coffee, then sold for enormous profits back in Europe. The profits was often reinvested in other goods to be traded for captives back in Africa and so on. If you want more in-depth information on the transatlantic slave trade, I recommend you read Hugh Thomas' book titled The Slave Trade, the story of the Atlantic slave trade 1440 through 1870. This is a thick book, roughly 912 pages, and worth sacrificing some of your time to read. The book is almost the same price as a supersized combo from a fast food restaurant, destroying the image of African hair. Europeans who had traded and communicated with Africans knew the complexity and the significance of black hair. They were often struck by the various hairstyles that they saw within each community. In an effort to dehumanize and break the African spirit, Europeans shaved the heads of enslaved Africans upon arrival to the Americas. This was not merely a random act, but a symbolic removal of African culture. The shaving of the hair represents the removal of any trace of African identity and further acts to dehumanize.
What's good with everybody, man? It's your boy Sean P. In the place to be. Please like the show, share the show. Tell a friend, we're live. I want to knock this out real quick, man. I don't even give a fuck if it's 2 people in the chat. I'm tired of people coming to me week after week, week over week. This particular person with the same gibberish. A Political Hill article from Nut Jobs. Not an article, a video from YouTube. They ain't got no sources in the description. They're just on the panel talking. A TikTok video of 2 motherfuckers talking about gain of function. We went through gain of function 3 years ago. However, he sends me a TikTok video of 2 motherfucking nut jobs with no credentials talking gain of function. Everybody that the brother sends me has no credentials, is no virologist, is no immunologist, is no epidemiologist, don't know shit about viruses. They're just reporting news. So here's what they're reporting. They're reporting some shit that came out about a few months ago in China, where they said patient zero, right? Could have contracted COVID from or nearby the lab. Or let me rephrase that. Patient zero would be this person that worked in the lab. Never mind the fact that he could have contracted it outside and came in. Never mind any other information. They're not ruling out the possibility. Then they also reported that that person and someone else simultaneously could have been patient zero. They were nowhere near lab. He didn't show that shit. He didn't send me that shit. He didn't even talk about that. But that's the type of world we live in. All right? So this is just China. People are trying to brace to hear some whole shit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they are not even claiming that it came from a lab. They're saying that the first infected person could have worked in the lab. Never mind the fact that we have put this under a microscope. All right. They have scrutinized and manipulated this particular the virus to see if gain of function was an option or to see if this was a natural phenomenon. They have already determined that COVID comes from the earth, that it's natural. SARS-CoV-2 is natural. Could not have been manipulated in a lab and spread. Okay? So what are we doing going on goddamn the fourth year? We're going on the fourth year. And we're back to year 0 with this bullshit. Because there's a political showdown on Capitol Hill between the Republicans and the Democrats, and the Republicans have yet to provide substantial information in their shit. I'm just sick of it. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm not gonna waste a lot of time. I'm going to take you to a specific. Let me share my screen. I'm gonna take you to a specific timestamp. All my description, all my sources are in the actual video. I'm not going to talk about all of the sources in the video. However, I am going to get you to particular. Hold on. Get you to a particular marker, and then I need to get the fuck up out of here. I really got to get away from where I'm at right now. I probably need to get in my car and like just go. But all right, my screen is sharing. I'm gonna play a little bit of this and then I'm gonna get into the source and reference.
This week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick.
From the University of Pennsylvania, Perelman School of Medicine in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is TWIV, This Week in Virology, episode 1017, recorded on June 14th, 2023. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Today, we are at a symposium at the University of Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name of it. What is it called? Do you have it? Yeah. Give me the piece of paper. I should have.
Viruses.
Today, we are at the Center for Research, is that right, on coronaviruses and other emerging pathogens. The Symposium on Emerging Viruses. Thank you very much. We've had a series of talks today, and now we have grabbed a few people from the meeting and a few people not from the meeting, and we're going to do a little TWIV in front of an audience of at least 1,000, as far as I can tell. So joining me today, right on my left, who invited me to do this and who has been on TWIV a couple of times before, from here at the University of Pennsylvania, Susan Weiss, welcome.
Thank you.
I think this is your
Actually,
third.
3 times.
This is your third time?
Fourth time. Fourth.
I've been on 4 times total. Okay, thanks for having us here, and welcome back. And also to Susan's left, also at the University of Pennsylvania, the chair of the department, Rick Bushman, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Now, all the way on my right, from Johns Hopkins University, Gigi Gronval, welcome to TWIV.
Thank you.
And also from the University of Pennsylvania on my right, David, is it Johnson or Johansson?
Jones.
Johnson, welcome to TWIV.
Thank you.
You look very sharp.
I try.
And we are going to talk about the origin of SARS-CoV-2. We thought we would chat a little bit informally about it. And I want to do first, as a little backdrop for a discussion, I would like each of you to just tell us your expertise so that we can put it in the context of this discussion. Now, Susan, you need no introduction because you've been working on coronaviruses longer than any living person, right?
Not quite.
No?
A couple of people longer.
So you're a virologist.
Yes.
And you've worked on coronaviruses your whole
Yes.
career,
Mhm.
right?
Since my postdoc, yeah.
Anything else we should know about you?
No.
Okay, go look at the other.
All right, so real quick, before he introduces the last person, I want to make sure that I am freaking clear to you, okay? I want to make sure that this is perfectly clear for those of you who are catching the replay, for those of you who just may have hopped in. I am so sick of the political narrative, the misinformation, the clickbait titles, and the pseudoscience that is spewed over social media in regard to this damn virus that has killed more than 1.2 million Americans. I'm gonna say it again. This virus has killed more than 1.2 million fucking Americans. I don't even want to talk about nobody else. I want to talk specifically about the United States of America and what happened during the fucking pandemic. 1.2 million fucking people died behind this virus that continues to mutate and adapt and manipulate. And then we have these little spreads and these little gasps that continue to happen, and we're still in the invisible fight. It's just a fact. But this panel, I want listen. Y'all ain't understanding. I need y'all to know who the fuck is these people on the panel. Listen to the credentials really slowly again. And then Jalil, if you are in the chat, I want you to show me a TikTok video that you done fucking sent to me, a YouTube video that you done fucking sent to me, or any type of article that you sent to me that measure up to the fucking credentials of this panel. I ain't even got to add nobody else. Just this panel alone. You ain't sent nothing equivocally of interest that comes from experts in the field, let alone have people like this been on in any of them videos you sent me, bro.
And now we have grabbed a few people from the meeting and a few people not from the meeting, and we're going to do a little twiv in front of an audience of at least 1,000.
Now, remember, he is recording live from a symposium in regard to the fucking origins of the coronavirus. Real quick, let me show y'all something. You see my screen? Yeah, I know you see my fucking screen. So here's some takeaways. This is unclassified. So here's some takeaways from what they talked about, what they know, what was disclosed. I'm putting all of that on the screen. But there's more. But I want you to know who these people are. Again, I think some of y'all really weren't listening. Yeah, you in the chat. I see you now. You in the chat. So I want you to show me. I want you to go back in all the bullshit you've been sending me, and I want you to show me anyone that has any credentials that meet the standard of any of these people on the panel. You're sending me YouTube videos of uncredentialed political nut jobs from the right and left side, TikTok videos and more, and none of that shit has any scientific evidence driven. All opinion posts, perspective, claims. No substance, no evidence, no data, nothing that can substantiate why the fuck you even sending this to me. Nah, it's not emotional damage. It's not emotional anything. It's like we're going on at the end of this year to be 4 years since COVID began to take over. And you want me to reset and go back to some shit we discussed in year one. And I don't understand that. I don't understand how you want me to go back a few years, right? And address some shit that was discussed a few years ago and even put in my book, which you still ain't bought and even read. You have no virology book. You don't understand what a virus is, but yet you want no one else does this, bro. No one else. No one else on my timeline or my friends list does this. You continue to forward me or tag me in bullshit because you act like you want to have a conversation about something, but you're unlearned and don't have the evidence to have that conversation. Because in order to have that conversation, you have to be a student of the information. You need to go take some virology classes, something, because you're wasting my time sending me that shit. It's almost worse than the abos. Like, bro, I'm past that. You should be past that, but you're hung up. You're caught up in some type of conspiracy web that you can't shake. And you say emotional? No, nigga, what's your agenda? Fuck out of here. My bad. Y'all couldn't hear nothing. Hold on. I was reading something in the chat. All right, so real quick, before I hit the play button, he says, what did you say? No. Why you retract it? Okay, now I gotta go on StreamYard to get your retracted comment. I don't know why you retracted it, because you said some shit that it didn't have. You said the information that I sent you was that they have 3 doctors who are considered patient zero for COVID-19. The information that you sent me was a political hill conversation with no epidemiologists, virologists, or immunologists on the panel. No, nothing that you had sent me said any of such. What you sent me was information in regard to a TikTok video of 2 white guys saying some fucking shit. There's no whistleblower in this situation. You see how fictitious you are talking about a fucking whistleblower? How can someone make a goddamn TikTok video or sitting on Washington Hill on a panel talking about whistleblower? There's no whistleblower, bro. They've been looking for patient zero. They've been walking back down that. There's no secret about patient zero. And patient zero ain't even the motherfucking it's not even a definitive true patient zero. That's like saying the first human. You don't know who the fucking first infected person was. So how could you sit there and say any of such? So again, I want y'all to see who the hell is on this panel. And then I want you to tell me in anything, have you ever sent me a scientific article or journal in regard to how you feel about if this was from the lab or not? Because you're hung up on every conspiracy worth what you got going on.
Expertise so that we can put it in the context of this discussion. Now, Susan, you need no introduction because you've been working on coronaviruses longer than any living person, right?
Not quite.
No?
A couple people longer.
So you're a virologist.
Yes.
And you've worked on coronaviruses your whole
Yes.
career, right?
Not my whole, since my postdoc, yeah.
Anything else we should know about you?
No.
Okay, go look at the other toys. But Rick, what do you do relevant to this discussion?
I'm the chair of the microbiology department. We've done work on many viruses over the years, HIV, SARS-CoV-2 with the emergence of the epidemic. We've done a great deal of work, some with my colleague Ron Coleman here, on the microbiome, including the microbiome meets SARS-CoV-2, metagenomics. When early in the epidemic, when there wasn't much sequencing going on, we were sort of the sequence observatory for Philadelphia, sequencing variants and trying to track the emergence of new strains in our region. And since others have taken over, but for a while we were the main surveillance outfit there, and similarly helping set up assays for rapid screening. We cooked up an assay with homemade ingredients that ultimately was used for 70,000 assays in our medical school to make sure people weren't walking around infected and not knowing it. So some recent work on coronas with Susan and trying to find what we could do to help with the epidemic.
Okay. Gigi, what expertise do you bring to this table here?
So my expertise is probably a little bit unusual. So I have a background in immunology, but I've been working in health security or biosecurity for the last 20 years. And through that work, I've participated in some lab accident investigations. I've traveled all over the world to different laboratories to examine biosafety procedures. I have studied the history of biosecurity and biosafety, and I've written about the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 in a political science journal called Survival, and just last week in New England Journal of Medicine with Larry Gostin.
Okay, that's all great. And finally, David, what is your background relevant to our discussion?
My background is I'm the executive director for the Center of Ethics and the Rule of Law here at the University of Pennsylvania, But prior to that, I was with the FBI for almost 24 years. And though I didn't work directly with viruses, we did use some virology terms in dealing with particularly nasty defense lawyers. We would say they're a particularly virulent strain of lawyer.
Very good. Okay, so 24 years with the FBI. Should I be worried?
I think you're okay.
Very good. All right, so let's start. So and I encourage all of you to jump in at any time whenever you hear something that you'd like to say. So I think I've heard a poll which says that over half of Americans polled think that SARS-CoV-2 came from a laboratory. And to me, this is very disturbing as a person who's worked on viruses my whole career. And Susan, let's start the discussion. There are two scenarios. One is that the virus, and this has to do with a laboratory in Wuhan, China, where the pandemic began, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that it was either purposefully made in a laboratory or that it accidentally escaped a laboratory. And I wanted to ask you, before we talk about SARS-CoV-2, did we have similar discussions with SARS in 2003?
I don't think that we did. However, during the SARS-2 pandemic, I received some anonymous book that was describing that actually SARS-1 was made by humans. The same scenario, although I hadn't heard it at the time. So apparently there are people that think that that was the case.
Okay.
Which I don't, of course.
So the idea, let's talk first about the idea that it was made in a laboratory. Susan, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I have a lot of thoughts about that.
I'm sure.
I think that would have taken superhuman.
Real quick, you asked me if I know what they're saying. Absolutely. I spent the whole pandemic studying the shit that they're saying. Not only watching lectures, but buying books that cost over $150 a piece to know more about it so that I could comprehend the goddamn science. Reading all of those articles and learning how to read all of those articles so I can put the information together. So I can know what the scientists are looking at under a microscope and determine what site locations are what, and how the shit affects a cell and how it spreads and does all the other things, and then how the immune system responds to all of that. So you ask me if I know? Nigga, I spent years trying to know this shit. The fuck do you mean do I know what they talking about? Do you fucking know? Ain't no motherfucking egos. See, that's the thing. If I spend my time learning this shit, bruh, trying to get at this shit, bruh, why are you spending your time trying to push some misinformation? You ain't even trying to learn. So what is you sending me this shit for? Because you ain't listening. So when I tell you some shit, you send me some shit, and at first I was just telling you stuff. Or I would send you stuff. Or I would do a show on stuff. But you wasn't listening to that. You wasn't comprehending. You wasn't digesting that. You wasn't even trying to hear that. You done got on my panel a couple of times trying to insinuate certain shit. And even when I correct you, you still was disingenuous and not accept the correction. So who the fuck has an ego problem here? There's no ego. There's no ego in science. There's no room for it. You either have the evidence or you don't have the evidence. I'm not pissing on you. I'm telling you what I'm tired of. If you spend that much time looking up shit to send to me and listening to shit to send to me to try to persuade a different argument, you could take that same amount of energy that you just put into all of that shit that you was trying to send and tag and post and all of that shit and study the right shit. You ain't even reading both sides of the argument, my nigga. You don't even know both sides of the argument. If I asked you both sides of the argument, you couldn't tell me both sides of the argument because you don't even understand either side of the argument. Outside of the fact what may be blatant as a headline. They saying it come from a lab. What the evidence for it?
human powers to make it in the laboratory, because as we were just chit-chatting about, I think despite everything that we've done with SARS-CoV-2, I don't.
Let her say this shit again. She working on the virus. You ain't got to listen to me. She working on the virus.
So apparently there are people that think that that was the case.
Okay.
Which I don't, of course.
So the idea, let's talk first about the idea that it was made in a laboratory. Susan, what are your thoughts on
Okay,
that?
I have a lot of thoughts about that.
I'm sure.
I think that would have.
What's the name of the whistleblower? Name the whistleblower. You the first person to say something about a goddamn whistleblower. Name the whistleblower. Who's whistleblower? What's the Chinese person name? What's the whistleblower name? Is it a Chinese person or is it an American? What's the whistleblower name? You know so much. What's the whistleblower name? Where they from? What's the whistleblower name? If you know, bro, what's the whistleblower? If you don't know? I'm strong and wrong. What's the whistleblower's name? What's the whistleblower name? You don't know, do you? You don't know, do you? Just say you don't know. Dr. Li Wenliang, the Wuhan whistleblower. It ain't no American. So anything that you were claiming about an American whistleblower is bullshit. There's no whistleblower from America. There's nothing that you can say from America. So once again, this is, and he ain't even a whistleblower. All he did was warn several of his colleagues about an appearance of a new SARS-CoV virus in December 2019 at the very beginning of the global pandemic. Initially reprimanded by a hospital administrator and formally admonished by the local authorities in Wuhan, he was later exonerated by the Supreme People's Court of People's Republic of China, and after his untimely death, honored by Central Government of China as a martyr, one of the highest honors given to a private citizen in China. This your whistleblower, bro. All he did was warn people about the presence of SARS-CoV-2. He didn't say it come from no motherfucking lab. He ain't do none of the other shit. You said I'm loud and wrong, or I'm proud and wrong, and all this old shit. You still ain't showed me no evidence. You see the difference between you and me? There's levels to this shit, my nigga. Demonstration beats conversation. I can point you in the direction of the evidence. I can show you at the site of the virus that would have had to been manipulated by gain of function in order for it to be what it is. I can show you at the site of the specific site of the virus that we know that it's natural, that it comes from nature. Excuse me. You can't do none of that. You can't do none of that. If I put the virus up on a map, you can't show me no sites. You don't know shit about the virus. But you're going to tell me what some quote unquote whistleblower saying. How the fuck is the whistleblower saying anything? Wait, let me take it back. How's the whistleblower saying anything in 2023 and he died? He dead. He ain't here. He ain't here. He died. Here you go right here. He died. 2020. Come on, man. Listen. Let's not play this game. Let me ignore you because you ain't got shit. Let me talk.
Have taken superhuman powers to make it in the laboratory because as we were just chit-chatting about, I think we
No. Doctor, you said it would take what? What would it take, doctor?
Okay.
which I don't, of course.
So the idea, let's talk first about the idea that it was made in a laboratory. Susan, what are your thoughts on
Okay,
that?
I have a lot of thoughts about that.
I'm sure.
I think that would have taken superhuman powers to make it in the laboratory because as we were just chit-chatting about, I think despite everything that we've done with SARS-CoV-2, I don't think that anybody knows on like kind of molecular level why it spreads the way it does or why it behaves the way it does. So the idea that any mad scientist could design it seems really, to me, seems quite ridiculous. The other thing that is sort of magical thinking is that you can just think of a virus and design and make it like de novo. You have to have a template to start with. You have to have some RNA backbone of a genome to copy, and then you can modify it as you like. You might not know how to modify it, but you could modify it. But you would have to have a starting material. And as far as we know, there's no other virus reported that is similar enough to have been just tweaked into SARS-2. So for those reasons, I think that it's just not plausible at all.
So as you mentioned when you introduced me, I made the first
Right.
infectious DNA of an RNA animal virus. And in all the years we worked on it, it just is very difficult to modify viruses in any
That's
way
right.
at all. And I think if you don't have a history of doing that, you don't appreciate that.
Right.
For any virologist who has since modified DNA copies of viruses, it just doesn't work most of the time.
Yeah, and a coronavirus is about 4 times the length of
Yeah.
polio. So if polio was difficult to manipulate, think how much more SARS-CoV-2 is, or any coronavirus.
A few
Hold on, doctor. Say this shit one more time, doc. Say this shit again. Please say this one more time.
SARS in 2003.
I don't think that we did. However, during the SARS-2 pandemic, I received some anonymous book that was describing that actually SARS-1 was made by humans. The same scenario, although I hadn't heard it at the time. So apparently there are people that think that was the case.
Okay.
Which I don't, of course.
So the idea, let's talk first about the idea that it was made in a laboratory. Susan, what are your thoughts on
Okay,
that?
I have a lot of thoughts about that.
I'm sure.
I think that would have taken superhuman powers to make it in the laboratory because as we were just chit-chatting about, I think despite everything that we've done with SARS-CoV-2, I don't think that anybody knows on like kind of molecular level why it spreads the way it does or why it behaves the way it does. So the idea that any mad scientist could design it seems really, to me, seems quite ridiculous. The other thing that is sort of magical thinking is that you can just think of a virus and design and make it like de novo. You have to have a template to start with. You have to have some RNA backbone of a genome to copy, and then you can modify it as you like. You might not know how to modify it, but you could modify it. But you would have to have a starting material. And as far as we know, there's no other virus reported that is similar enough to have been just tweaked into SARS-2. So for those reasons, I think.
Listen, look at this. Look at this. An expert in the field of virology who studies viruses, who's worked on SARS-CoV-2, he says this about her response. This is so weak. Okay. It's so weak, right? It's weak, right? That's what you said. COVID-19 almost certainly did not come from a lab leak. Here's how we know. Dr. Angela Rasmussen is a virologist at the University of Saskatchewan Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization and an adjunct professor of biochemistry, microbiology, and immunology at the University of Saskatchewan, and at the lead host of the pathogen interaction pillar for the Canadian Coronavirus Variants Rapid Response Network. Let me stop right there real quick. You can read this, right? You can read this. Since the world first learned about SARS-CoV-2 and novel coronavirus that would go on to cause COVID-19 pandemic still raging more than 2 years later, major question has gone unanswered. Where did the virus come from? Stemming from that, how did the virus, whose closest known relatives circulate in Laos, more than 1,000 kilometers away from it, find its way to Wuhan and then the world? Did the virus come from a laboratory or from nature? Seemingly, the only thing that people on all sides of the origins questions are able to agree on is the need for a robust, independent, evidence-driven investigation. And although attempts were made to declare, including several investigations conducted by the government officials, international public health agencies, and the World Health Organization, these efforts have been impeded by incomplete and inaccessible early data. Widespread speculation, conflicts of interest, and an increasingly toxic political, is what the fuck you always talking to me about, political climate that has undermined scientific expertise and methods. Finally, an international team of virologists, evolutionary biologists, and statisticians, of which we are a part, have an answer. Oh, they got an answer. Despite limitations of the evidence base, we applied our scientific training to uncover meticulously and analyze the surprisingly rich data that do exist. Doing so, we can confidently say the pandemic began at the Hunan wholesale seafood market in Wuhan, with all evidence pointing resoundingly at zoonotic spillover, the transmission from live animals sold there. These jumps happened at least twice. Here is how we know. And then it goes on to argue how we know. Early findings published in the Journal of Scientific Reports show live animals susceptible to SARS-CoV-2, such as raccoon, dogs, red foxes, were sold across the markets in the Wuhan preceding in the pandemic. Let me stop real quick. Let me remove your comment. Well, okay, all right, comment removed. Let me get back to some real shit, bro. And I'll come back to that article since it's so weak.
That it's just not plausible at all.
So as you mentioned in when you introduced me, I made the first infectious DNA of an.
So I'm supposed to listen to somebody in the chat. Doesn't work with viruses. Is not an expert in any of the field. Has no written information, no scientific articles, nothing at all. Thinks because he sees the initials doctor, right? They could be a goddamn chiropractor. But just because he sees the initials DR or whatever he assumes, right? He would find some validity or whatever. He brought up a whistleblower. I asked him for the whistleblower's name. He still hadn't provided the whistleblower. Who's the whistleblower? Who was you talking about? I don't see no name in the chat. But it's weak. So we're supposed to listen to you, right? We're supposed to listen to you. Fuck out of here.
An RNA animal virus. And in all the years we worked on it, it just is very difficult to modify viruses in any way at all. And I think if you don't have a history of doing that, you don't appreciate that.
Right.
For any virologist who has since modified DNA copies of viruses, it just doesn't work most of the time.
Yeah, and a coronavirus is about 4 times the length of polio. So if polio is difficult to manipulate, think how much more SARS-CoV-2 is, or any coronavirus.
A few prominent individuals have gone on record saying that the furin cleavage site is a smoking gun for being made in a laboratory, which of course it's not. But
okay, that's another kind of bone to pick, I think, because furin sites were described in coronaviruses in the late 70s by K. Holmes. The spike protein was shown to have a furin site. Not all, this is in mouse hepatitis virus, and for mouse hepatitis virus, most isolates have a furin site, some do not. Mm-hmm. The one that does not is highly infectious for mice. So at least in the context of MHV, I think that, or looks like, the strains that have a furin site need it. The strains that don't have it don't need it. And even when we made mutants of this strain that has it, it was still pretty infectious and could cause quite severe disease. So in the case of SARS-CoV-2, I think if the furin site is lost, it does become less pathogenic, but that's because it evolved to have one. SARS-1 is perfectly pathogenic without it. So to me, it's kind of really a non-starter. And the idea that someone took it from HIV and put it into coronavirus, we knew about it in coronaviruses before we ever heard of HIV. So it's kind of a backward thinking. So
But the idea that you could put a furin site in requires that you have something close to SARS-CoV-2 to begin with.
right, and in fact, if you stick a furin site where it doesn't belong, it may have the opposite effect. It may give you a dead virus. I don't think that it's predictable. The idea that, I know there's this thing floating around about the grant proposal that was to put furin sites into viruses, may or may not have even helped the virus. It may have killed the virus.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is, I think, a EcoHealth Alliance NIH application, which talked about putting furin sites,
Right,
but was
right.
never
It was
funded.
never funded,
And
right.
anyway, I don't care if it was funded. I don't care if they did the experiments or not.
Me neither.
You didn't have SARS-CoV-2 close enough to
No,
modify it, right?
Didn't-
That's the thing.
it's ridiculous, really.
But then if you make this kind of argument, the naysayers, who, let's call them the lab leakers, will say, well, how do you know someone didn't have SARS-CoV-2 somewhere in some laboratory?
That's something you really can't 100% know. But I think personally, if it had been in the Wuhan lab, there are enough people in that lab that it would have leaked, that information would have leaked,
Yeah.
not the virus would have leaked. And I have another kind of thing about leaking viruses. When I always ask people, what do you mean that the virus leaked, right? Viruses can't get up and walk out of the room. They have to be inside of a person. And if you have, like, a mixture, say, of viruses from bat guano, you're going to have very small amounts of those viruses. And most of the, quote, virus in bat guano is sequences, and it's not actually infectious virus. Like how Eric said, you hardly ever see infectious virus when you see genome. So, okay, so the idea that that small amount of virus could get into a person, it's possible, but it doesn't seem that likely to me. I think, when you have lab leaks, like for SARS-1 leaked, so to speak, in the lab, not leaked, it infected somebody in the lab, it was because they were working with it. It would be like working with an isolated virus and growing it up, having enough of it that you could aerosolize it or something like that. But I think it's much less likely to just inadvertently get infected by a small amount of virus. It's not impossible.
Gigi,
but-
have you ever looked at the SARS-1 lab-associated infection? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was very different. I mean, it was tragic because there's one researcher who got infected and then ended up giving the virus to her mom, who died. China acted in a very different way than the lab leakers accused China of acting this time around. They closed down the facility, they notified WHO, they had a moratorium on research for some time, they had people monitor symptoms. So, I mean, it was a very outward, transparent, for them, public health response. So that was in response to the laboratory accident of SARS-CoV-1. For SARS-CoV-2, you asked, how did people get this idea? I mean, we can't forget that the President of the United States declared that this was a laboratory accident. And so I think a lot of people formed their impressions of that just right from the, that authoritative in their minds source that, that the president said so.
And more recently, the former CDC head testified the same thing, that it definitely came from a lab.
Former FDA.
Former CDC.
Oh,
yeah, Redfield,
yes,
Robert Redfield.
Yep.
Yeah. So when the public hears those sorts of people, they
Sure.
tend to believe it. So the SARS-1 incident, what was the containment being done at the time? Do you know?
I don't recall. I think it was BSL-3, but there there was some incorrect procedure. There were a couple of different incidents with SARS-CoV-1 in Taiwan and China, and I've jumbled them together because in one case there was a problem with a filter, and somebody went to investigate it and got their nose, real close to where they shouldn't have. But it was, it was procedures that were not followed correctly.
And in that case, they were growing large amounts of the virus in culture already.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't very at the very beginning.
So that's very different from having, say, a specimen in an animal, where,
Right.
as you said, they're
Look at this question in the chat. Look at this question in the chat. Is the virus approved by the FDA without emergency use? What? What? Is the virus approved? You don't even know are you talking vaccine or are you talking virus, my nigga? They don't approve viruses, nigga. Viruses are organisms. Microorganisms. The FDA ain't got no goddamn approval list for what virus is susceptible and what virus is not susceptible in society. Polio still exists. What are you talking about? Reword your question.
very small amounts. Rick, do you have any thoughts about some of these issues?
Well, we don't really have any supporters of the lab leak hypothesis on this panel. So let me articulate what I think are the best arguments. I think the lab leak hypothesis people generally don't make their own best case. So let me try. So first, what was the origin? There are lots of pandemics that are clearly known to have started with jumps from animals. No pandemic is known to have started with a lab leak. There are coronaviruses that have been found in the wild that are 95% identical in bats in Southern Asia. Some have been shown to infect human cells. So there's lots of reasons to think a zoonosis is likely, and none to think that a lab leak is likely. But what are the best arguments for the lab leak? Well, there are lots of bad arguments. One is that you can't be sure that A and B didn't happen. That proves A and B are true. We sort of heard that one in the last panel we were on. Or what about Bigfoot? What about a lab leak? Can you prove it wasn't a lab leak? Can you prove Bigfoot wasn't involved? And, no, but it doesn't seem very likely. And you touched on the virus. It's unlikely the virus was created by de novo synthesis in a laboratory. The virus shows no signs of being made by previously known pieces. So if you want to say it was synthesized, you have to say it was from previously unknown parts. And furthermore, you don't know how to engineer asymptomatic spread, which is obviously one of the biggest things here. So another weak argument is, touched on also, there's this Institute of Virology in Wuhan. So maybe it came from there, but physically it was like 4 miles away at the wet market that it seems to have started. And furthermore, I've never heard anyone say, well, suppose you pick a city arbitrarily and ask, was there some kind of lab there that would be likely to be an origin? There's a big molecular biology lab in Beijing. What if it came from Beijing? What about Philadelphia? We have a well-known coronavirus researcher here, BSL-3 lab, Department of Microbiology. I mean, you could make up a story, I think, about many cities. And lastly, another weak argument, the Chinese are concealing stuff, and their response has been consistently lame. We heard about that. The explanation we've been getting seems to be, well, maybe it came in with frozen food.
Let me pause it real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, jurors in the chat, and those of you who are joining the panel right now, you have missed a substantially large amount of shit. He says, let me put this in the chat. See, this is why you shouldn't type. You shouldn't even say nothing. You should just be literally quiet right now. So are we selling a black community? We cannot use or did you mean telling? Are we telling the black community we cannot use our journalists like Matt Taibbi as a source? Matt Taibbi as a source for fucking what? He's an American author, journalist, and podcaster. He is not a virologist, epidemiologist, or immunologist. He ain't studied a virus ever in his life. Nothing. Why in the hell are we? Why? Why would you fix your mouth to utter this shit? Or your fingers, my bad. Your fingers. Now, to answer your question, first of all, who is his source? Nigga, I just put what you said on the screen. Who is his source? Who is the whistleblower? Have you asked that question to yourself? And have you found the so-called whistleblower? You cannot use a journalist for shit dealing with science. Now, back to your question about could we have used the vaccine? Did the FDA approve the vaccine that we have right now for the coronavirus without emergency use? Yes, we have a BLA. Put this in the chat. We have a BLA on Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines. BLA, which means that they're everywhere. They're everywhere. We have full authorization on both vaccines. We ain't even using them for emergency use no more, my nigga. We got full authorization. You see how far behind you is? And that shit happened last year. You ain't paying attention. So let me continue, bro. I want you to listen to the dude again. He walks down every talking point that Jalel, or the good guy in the chat, is referring to.
Growing large amounts of the virus in culture already.
I think so. Right? Yeah. I mean, it wasn't very at the very beginning.
So that's very different from having, say, a specimen in an animal, where,
Right.
as you said, they're very small amounts. Rick, do you have any thoughts about some of these issues?
Well, we don't really have any supporters of the lab leak hypothesis on this panel. So let me articulate what I think are the best arguments. I think the lab leak hypothesis people generally don't make their own best case. So let me try. So first, what was the origin? There are lots of pandemics that are clearly known to have started with jumps from animals. No pandemic is known to have started with a lab leak. There are coronaviruses that have been found in the wild that are 95% identical in bats in Southern Asia. Some have been shown to infect human cells. So there's lots of reasons to think a zoonosis is likely, and none to think that a lab leak is likely. But what are the best arguments for the lab leak? Well, there are lots of bad arguments. One is that you can't be sure that A and B didn't happen. That proves A and B are true. We sort of heard that one in the last panel we were on. Or what about Bigfoot? What about a lab leak? Can you prove it wasn't a lab leak? Can you prove Bigfoot wasn't involved? And, no, but it doesn't seem very likely. And you touched on the virus. It's unlikely the virus was created by de novo synthesis in a laboratory. The virus shows no signs of being made by previously known pieces. So if you want to say it was synthesized, you have to say it was from previously unknown parts. And furthermore, you don't know how to engineer asymptomatic spread, which is obviously one of the biggest things here. So another weak argument is, touched on also, there's this Institute of Virology in Wuhan. So maybe it came from there, but physically it was like 4 miles away at the wet market that it seems to have started. And furthermore, I've never heard anyone say, well, suppose you pick a city arbitrarily and ask, was there some kind of lab there that would be likely to be an origin? There's a big molecular biology lab in Beijing. What if it came from Beijing? What about Philadelphia? We have a well-known coronavirus researcher here, BSL-3 lab, Department of Microbiology. I mean, you could make up a story, I think, about many cities. And lastly, another weak argument, the Chinese are concealing stuff, and their response has been consistently lame. We heard about that. The explanation we've been getting seems to be, well, maybe it came in with frozen food, which is self-serving nonsense, but it's sad in that it's putting the origin outside China, and so people are protecting themselves in a repressive society. Anybody who was blamed for it could get in big fat trouble and their family harmed or something. So what are the best arguments? Well, if you search Wikipedia on lab leak, and this was sort of coming up, you get like 50 examples. And some of them are kind of lame, but many are, you know, tragic. As we heard, smallpox infections, getting some lab worker working with smallpox, getting infected and dying. I mean, it definitely has happened over and over that agents in labs were contained well enough and somebody got infected. And then another point that I think is a sort of argument worth thinking about. There's a step that's unclear in any model, which is how did the virus get to the Wuhan wet market where it was first observed? Was it from a lab? Was it from an animal that was infected coming into the market, a person infected? So I think it's not off the table to imagine there was someone from the lab who was exploring caves in southern China, got infected, and then went back to Wuhan and like coughed on an animal in the market or something like that. That's one candidate explanation, though certainly there's no evidence for it. So just this unexplained step in any model of how the virus got where it started, I think, you know, it's on the table that something about the lab could have been a factor. Although some of those, it's not even clear it's a leak. Maybe it never went in the lab and came out again, but rather was somebody like coughed on a person in the wet market.
So could I answer that?
Sure.
As we didn't get to it yet, but the other scenario, of course, is that there were specimens in the laboratory, bat specimens, but I understand that when you collect them, they immediately go into trizol and they're inactivated. So what's in the laboratory is no longer infectious virus. So anyway.
Well, then how could they get infected viruses out of the guano, which is something that
Well, they
we wanna
haven't
do.
apparently done it very effectively. So, you know, the pre-pandemic, the closest SARS-like virus was RATG13, which was still 1,200 bases away, but they didn't have infectious virus. And I can't tell you how many journalists I talked to wanted to know if this could have been modified to make SARS-CoV-2, but they don't even have infectious virus for it. But the best evidence comes from work of Michael Warby and his colleagues, who have shown that the Huanan market was the epicenter and that there in fact were two lineages that started very early. So in fact, two spillovers. Yeah. So very hard to imagine if someone from the lab brought it, the lab should have also been an epicenter.
You might have thought so, yeah. And the Warby data is a little bit ambiguous. The Chinese, so what that is, if any of you don't follow it, there was sampling all through the market several weeks after the start of the pandemic, and samples were found that were positive. And quite recently, they were sequenced to look for what other kinds of sequences could you find there. So there were some human sequences, some raccoon dog sequences. So maybe it was an infected raccoon dog, and lots of other stuff, just random fish and things from the wet market. So the data was kind of low quality. It's somewhat ambiguous. They may well have cited an infected raccoon dog because they had SARS-CoV-2 positive and raccoon dog, although that was argued against by Jesse Bloom. But anyway, the point being that probably the biggest point, though, is that this was several weeks after the start. And even if that was an infected raccoon dog, that wasn't the raccoon dog that started the epidemic or something. Sure. This is just saying it's spreading in the market.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, of course.
So there's, a lot of the discussion of like were the Chinese lying about what happened. Yes. There was a lot of lying that was going on, not only by China, but by the US, accusing China of starting the pandemic. There was a lot of Russian disinformation in this as well, of where this pandemic started. But the question is, why? Why were people lying about it? And so some of the actions right after, it seemed like many of the cases, more than half of the early cases, were connected to the market. And the market was closed down. Right. So then you didn't have the animals to be able to take samples from. And so we have to infer, what was there before? For the first year, the Chinese insisted that there was no illegal activity going on at that marketplace. And of course, part of that illegal activity was the presence of raccoon dogs, the presence of mink and other animals that were being sold illegally, that for a high price that should not have been there. So I appreciate Jesse Bloom pointing out the value of that specific piece of information, whether or not you could tell if there was a raccoon dog that was actually infected at the market. But the fact is, there shouldn't have been a raccoon dog there. And why would a susceptible animal be in where you would expect it to be, and have samples on the hair and feather removal machines and so forth that are positive?
So the data are not perfect because as on January 1, the market was shut down and sanitized. But what I find interesting, the environmental sampling does show the two lineages, but also shows most of the positive samples are in the part of the market where mammals were sold, not where the fish or other, which makes, it's all internally consistent,
right?
At least.
Consistent with spreading, but that doesn't mean that's exactly where it started. It just seems that it was there those weeks later.
Well, to have most of the early cases, though, it seems like it most likely originated. And I would say that we had Michael Warby on TWIV, and he presented this very well. And he's probably listening now and screaming at us. Go.
Let me show you what I'm referring to. So there's this article, right, with these figures in it, right? And this is what he's referring to, the doctor presenting information so well. Okay? Link to the Hunan market, no non-link to the Hunan market. And he's talking about these cases and these areas and where there were more cases than not, which would be like an epicenter at some point. But anyway, this information was presented to us, everybody. This information, listen real closely. This information was presented to us in the argument for the epicenter of the pandemic. Now, right here, the Hunan market, right? Across this bridge would be the lab behind this picture. They have lineage, you see lineage B, you see lineage B, you see all cases, you see linked cases, there's a small unlinked cases, and then you see the population here, and it talks about a whole lot of stuff. What he did was presented some information on show 847 of TWIV that talked about the flow of this pandemic and how lineage A and lineage B existed. And then they walked it all the way down to the market and where they have the evidence for this information at. And as you can see here, this is the Hunan market, and this is the casing point for where this stuff was really held at. So you would see over here in this area where they have like the highlight points, and then there's low light points out here, and then there's, you know, little points, and this is where they extracted, right, samples of the virus in those areas. And it was real hot over here in this area. And then again, they just showing points of contention to where it would be. Now we've shown this information before, right? And it says, understanding how severe acute syndrome or SARS-CoV-2 emerged in 2019 is critical to preventing future zoonotic outbreaks before they become the next pandemic. The Hunan seafood market in Wuhan, it was certified as a likely source of a case, early reports, but later the conclusion became controversial. We show here that the earliest known COVID-19 cases from December in 2019, including those without report direct links, were geographically centered on the market. So all of the earliest cases for SARS-CoV-2 were centered on the market. We report that live SARS-CoV-2 susceptible mammals were sold at the market in the late 2019. That is why you see the cases of those in this figure right here of the animals that were mentioned. And SARS-CoV-2 positive environmental samples were spaciously associated with vendors selling live mammals. Although there's insufficient evidence to define upstream events and exact circumstance remain obscure, our analysis indicate that the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 occurred through the live wildlife trade in China and show that the Hunan market was the epicenter of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 pandemic. Now, mind you, years ago, this market was told to stop selling freaking wildlife. They continue to sell freaking wildlife. And by doing so, right, it got us to where we are today. Straight like that. But anyway, he's referring to, let's get back on the bill.
Listen to the way that he presented it. But Gigi, I thought you've written a lot about lab accidents and security and so forth. And I wonder if you could talk about two specific ones that are useful. One is the 1977 H1N1, and then the Sverdlovsk accident.
Sure.
In these terms.
So over the course of the last several years, the lab leakers have pointed to, well, this kind of thing has happened before. You know, in 1977, the flu that year came from a freezer. It did not come from, it was not naturally circulating. It was the same strain as earlier strain from the 1950s. So there was, you know, unless, you know, our views of viral evolution are vastly different than all other evidence, like it definitely was not a natural event. So the question is, well, what was it? And so this was over 10 years ago, I guess, or about 10 years ago, we examined the different possibilities for where this virus came from, why the flu that year was basically a repeat from the 1950s. And we looked at the potential of a biological weapons attack, which, you know, makes sense sort of if you think of the people who are most sick were young people because they were not exposed to this virus that had been circulating in the 1950s. And the Air Force Academy had to actually shut down for the first time in its history and things like that. We looked at the potential for a laboratory accident, but what we learned more was that, you know, some of the features of the virus, some of the temperature sensitivity of the strain of virus that strain that became epidemic, and also communication made to a U.S. researcher, Peter Palese, said that, you know, they were concerned about this virus and attenuated vaccines were all the rage in that time. And they inoculated thousands of military recruits and it reverted and became a pandemic. So that's where most of the evidence lies versus like somebody drops a beaker somewhere and then starts a pandemic.
But that incident is often cited by lab leakers as an example of a lab escape, which is not really correct, right?
It's more like a medical, it's a public health disaster, but it's not a laboratory accident in that somebody, you know, injects themselves and gets sick and that sort of thing. I mean, and sadly, laboratory accidents happen. You know, they do happen, and it's important to investigate them, do what we can to learn from them and prevent them. But 1977 was probably not a laboratory accident.
Has any laboratory accident led to an epidemic or a pandemic of an infectious disease?
There have been a couple where there's been forward transmission. So like the one you mentioned, where the researcher working with SARS-CoV-1 ended up infecting their mother. There's been a few cases like that with really close contacts, but nothing, no epidemic, no pandemic.
So the other case that's an example is biological weapon development and accidents that happen. They're often cited as lab
accidents?
Yeah, this one is a little bit more offensive to me because and at the time, the Soviet Union had an illegal clandestine biological weapons program. Like they really should not have had thousands of scientists working towards this end, but they did. And there was an anthrax weapon facility that in this place called Sverdlovsk. It's since been renamed. But there was, since declassified intelligence has shown that there's an explosion at the lab, or an explosion at the facility. It was a manufacturing facility. And some people died of anthrax in the days following that initial explosion. And then there was another wave of deaths as the anthrax settled and got eaten by cows. And then people ate the cows and then they got sick and died. Like, it's a terrible accident, but I mean, it's not a lab, and it's not a legal activity. Like there's just nothing that is really applicable to the present day when it comes to that. And the other incident that people bring up too is the smallpox infection. Poor Janet Parker, the medical photographer in University of Birmingham in England, that, you know, it looks like she may have been illegally selling film at the time, like before, you know, it had digital photography, and film was really expensive, but she may have been visited the smallpox lab. And so, I mean, it was a terrible affair, but it's, you know, it was definitely something that is less likely to happen today.
I think that was also before we did proper containment. The smallpox at that time was being worked on in a laminar flow hood, or maybe even on the bench. So it's hard to compare it with today, where we are very careful about containment. Susan, do you know anything about the lab in Wuhan that would be informative?
Not really. I don't have any firsthand information. No.
Except that,
No.
that Zhongli was trained in the West, right? Knows Western procedures.
And I certainly respect her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does.
So, David, several months ago, the FBI concluded, or at least the press is saying they did, that the SARS-CoV-2 most likely came from a laboratory, and that conclusion is of low confidence. So I wonder if you could tell us, so I know you're not involved, you weren't involved in that at all, but what would scientists want phylogenetic trees. What would the FBI be looking for, and what does low confidence mean?
Let me caveat my statements for that. I do not speak for the FBI. I'm not with the FBI, and I don't speak for Penn. But I do have the intelligence classifications, the confidence levels. If that would be helpful, I can read through these quickly to say, what is what. Now, I wrote them down just so I get it correct here. Something that's deemed high confidence, the FBI's judgments are based on high quality information, or that of a nature of the issue makes it possible to render a solid judgment. Medium confidence generally means that the information is credibly sourced and plausible, but can be interpreted in various ways or is not of sufficient quality or corroborated sufficiently to warrant a higher level of confidence. Low confidence generally means that the information's credibility or plausibility is questionable. The information is too fragmented or poorly corroborated to make solid analytic inferences for the FBI, has serious concerns or problems with the sources of the information. So what does that all mean? The intelligence community is made up of, I think, 18 or 19 different agencies, and they have various areas of expertise. The CIA, for example, is international intelligence and what's going on. The FBI is more a domestic law enforcement agency, but it's also the only one of the intelligence community that's also a national security agency. So they will look at various streams of information that they have: intelligence, human source reporting, signals intelligence, any kind of over captures that they get on any of the countries that are involved here. And they will analyze it and then come up with opinions, or decide not to come up with opinion. One of the agencies that I think is interesting that hasn't opined on this is the National Center for Medical Intelligence. It's a subset of the Department of Defense Intelligence Agency. Infectious diseases and pandemics That is their bailiwick. They track things all over the world and come up with ideas of how does that impact the United States and the United States national security. And to my mind, they have been silent with this. So that kind of leads me to believe that they don't know, or they don't have enough information. But one thing I wanted to say too, you had referenced about former President Trump talking about that the Chinese, it's the Kung flu, and it was released here or there. A lot of these statements are made in the backdrop where a large portion of the American population is basically scientifically illiterate. I read an article that said that a majority of the public thinks that Homo sapiens and dinosaurs were on the Earth at the same time. And anyone with a basic scientific knowledge knows that that's not true. So I think these ideas, people don't know the difference between a virus and a bacteria. So it's very easy to mislead and manipulate people with these things.
So if from what I understand from your the definition of low confidence, why would they conclude then that it came from a laboratory if they have really very low confidence of their ability to conclude that?
I think the FBI came out with intermediate confidence. It was medium confidence.
Oh, it was medium.
Yeah. I don't know what they looked at. Like I said, I wasn't involved in this. I do know that they have analysts. They will consult with scientists. So they had some basis to make this. I just do not know what that is. And another thing is, and I've talked to Susan about this, where intelligence officials don't believe in coincidences. They will say something happened by this lab. The chances of that happening are so remote that there must be something here. And truth be told, China has not helped itself in this situation whatsoever. They've obfuscated information. They've put stuff on the web, taken it down, have basically tried to blame the United States for this, that we planted this there to stop China's rise. And their number one rule, modus operandi, is don't embarrass China internationally. Sure. So I think there's a fair bit of that involved here.
I think there's also, so there's a concept that comes from the intelligence world called, mirror imaging, that it's really important to keep in mind here, because if mirror imaging is when, somebody does something and you think, why did they do that? If I did that, I would be guilty. And so you assume that, your actions are on the person you're observing. And the lying and the obfuscation is evident. There's been a lot of it, but it's important to investigate, like, why is that, and does it necessarily mean, would it be the same thing that it would mean if I were in that situation? And it's important to think about this, because intelligence can often be wrong, and has been wrong pretty spectacularly, and many times over the last couple of decades, because people have projected their opinions and their actions onto their adversary.
Yeah, in the law, it's called consciousness of guilt, that why are they behaving that way? They're guilty, which is not necessarily the case here. And one of the best definitions of intelligence I've ever heard, it's a wilderness of mirrors, because you don't know what's going on, but there are intelligence successes that the public does not know about. And I will cite to one that's been written about, is with the Russian aggression into Ukraine. The US intelligence knew what they were going to try to do with coming up with a cover story and like basically a black flag thing, that the Ukrainians attacked them and they're Nazis, and basically put all that out there, and Russia and Putin was shut down from using those excuses.
Yeah, that was a huge success. And I don't mean to imply that the IC is always wrong. Like, I just, that it's sometimes that some of these high profile events, and whether it's WMD in Iraq, or that the World Trade Center is not going to get attacked a second time, or things like this, that intelligence can lead people astray.
Absolutely.
So this may be unanswerable, but in hearing these pronouncements from the intelligence community, one wonders if they have additional information. Is there any way of knowing, any way of sensing? Is there more to it than we're detecting?
I don't know. Generally, the way it's supposed to work post 9/11 is that they all have the same intelligence and they're sharing intelligence. That's in a perfect world. Sometimes agencies will have something that's so exquisitely sensitive that they might not share nice with the others. I'm not suggesting that happened here or any of that has happened, but those are kind of some of the lenses to look through this.
I think it's so hard for us, we as scientists who look at data and look for hard facts for why we make a conclusion, to listen to the Department of Energy in particular, and there was that huge headlines about them saying with low confidence they thought it came out of the lab without anything to substantiate it. And what is that all about? I mean, it's such a different style.
Yeah, it's intelligence isn't science; it's an art.
Right.
You know, there's information, there's wonderful technology, but it is not a science. It's not mathematics where 2 + 2 = 4. There's human judgments. Two people can look at the same fact pattern or the same witness and say, "I think they're credible," and then someone else will look at them. No, I don't. I think they're shifty. I think they're going to go sideways on this, and you know, it's a judgment call at the end of the day.
So you are now a civilian. You're not an FBI agent any longer, correct?
I am not, no.
So you can look at this through the lens of a civilian because this happened after you left the FDI. And I'm just curious, you're not a virologist, but when you heard that, did you have any particular thoughts?
Personally, you know, China is an enormous threat in the future and currently with the U.S. with espionage and spying, and so I always kind of have my antenna up in that regard, but I don't know enough facts about this to opine one way or another, or I feel, you know, I'm not scientifically qualified to do that.
Are you confident though that these intelligence agencies have facts, or it's just thinking something shifty or not shifty?
I don't know. I don't know what because a lot of this is classified. And then I think at the end of the day, one of the things that they came out with is that until China releases all the information and data, that it's an imperfect data set and you can't really make a determination.
What do they mean by all the information?
Chavis, he is absolutely saying that he did say that the CIA and the FBI and all of those intelligence agencies are indeed not using science. They're not using science to determine anything that they're saying. This dude says, yeah, people laugh at the black community because of people like you. That's why they laugh at the black community, because you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You still asking this. This is a problem. You're asking a question that we're beyond. We have approved BLA in business use vaccines for COVID-19. And you're over here still asking about FDA and EUA approvals. And then this is what you're asking. So are you telling us none of the COVID vaccines are approved by the FDA? I don't think that you understand what the fuck you're asking. You see how dumb you sound? You asking, so are you telling us none of the COVID vaccines are approved by the FDA? I'm saying, why'd you asking this dumbass question? We have full authorization, business as usual. Why are you asking this dumb shit? He said we need to do a week's worth of study saying who could bring out more informative information. What? You have lost right here. He doesn't know, man. He's just talking. Look. This is clear case. We need to do a week's worth of study saying who could bring out more informative information. What are you talking about? We don't need to do no study. I got 2 years of hold up. How many videos on this goddamn channel? No, not even listen. Between the Mossy Warrior Clan channel, between Kofi Pie Site channel, and between Science with Sean, there is 3 years of information on COVID-19. 3 years of information on COVID-19. As far as so, if that's what you're asking, right? What are you talking about? Bro, the vaccines are approved. Let me just do this real quick for you, bro. Let me just do this real quick for you, bro. Real quick. God damn, man. The Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax COVID-19 vaccines are available in the U.S. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccine are FDA approved. The FDA has limited the use of the J&J vaccine to certain people because of the whole blood clotting situation shit. The original Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are no longer authorized in the U.S. Instead, the bivalent updated versions will be used for all vaccine doses. People ages 6 months and older may qualify for a single update Pfizer or Moderna booster shot. Certain groups may qualify for a second updated booster shot. The Novavax vaccine has been authorized as a primary series for people's ages 12 and over. Adults 18 and older can also receive it as their first booster shot. What are we talking about, bro? That's quick like work right there. That should clear all of that shit up. May 2nd, 2023. So what are you asking? Because I don't think that you understand what you're asking. I think you're just typing and you're trying to say something, but you don't have a command or comprehend what's going on. So you just spewing shit. Scared of what? I'm not talking to you no more. I've talked to you. Listen, I'm done talking to you. You don't have evidence. If you got some information, then we can talk. You don't have evidence. I'm not listening to people ask questions no more. Fuck you and your questions. He only pulled up the comment when I did not approve emergency use only. This is why these conversations is ego. There's nothing ego, nigga. You're not making sense. You're not making sense. You don't know how to articulate shit. You don't even know what you're asking. Because listen, I put your comments on the chat. You said without emergency use, no. We're beyond emergency use. Moderna and Pfizer have full authorization. They are business as usual vaccines, like the polio vaccine, like the MMR vaccine, like the whooping cough, like any other vaccine out there. Every vaccine that's approved and on the market that is available, so is the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, and the Pfizer mRNA vaccine. The only two that are still under FDA emergency use authorization is Novavax and Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson is limited to a certain criteria of people. because it is known for causing clotting. So what are you saying? You said you're not articulate. Not every vaccine is granted an emergency use authorization before full approval. The FDA authorized COVID-19 vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, to answer an urgent need to protect. Okay. Okay, what's your point? You still don't have a point. And you just copied this and pasted it in the chat. So what's the point? What's the point, bro? We know that every vaccine isn't granted emergency use. We knew that because at the beginning of the pandemic, when they started working on vaccines, there was damn near like 20 or 30 damn vaccines that was trying to get trying to go into production. The FDA rejected all of those other vaccines, and I did a show on that shit 2 years ago. They rejected all the other vaccines and stuck with Moderna and Pfizer. And then Johnson & Johnson sprout up. Novavax made it through the cut. And then there was another vaccine that they tried to give a little life to, but it didn't have no shine because it didn't have the test results. So what is your point? You keep you trying to insinuate something and you don't really fully understand. So we all trying to understand what you're saying. But you're not making no sense. And I'm not going to get on the panel. I'm not going to let you on my panel to confuse the fuck out of me. Okay, so you're not asking anything, and you damn sure aren't saying anything. Ah, damn. You ain't even listening.
Data, what do they want from them?
I think some of the stuff that they put up on the web and took down, and then just, what happened? What are the report? What was their internal investigation? I guarantee they conducted a very detailed investigation to try to find out what happened here. And will they release that, or some unclassified version of it?
From what I understand, the sequences that were taken down were put back up.
Yeah.
Right. And they're complete as far as we can tell. Right.
Yeah. There have been now 3 reports on it. First, the Warraby one, then the Chinese George Gao report, and then Jesse Bloom opining on the 3 of them. And there's some difference in the conclusions they reach. I think a lot of it comes down to technical stuff, dealing with low quality data, and where do you set your thresholds? How much SARS-CoV-2 sequence do you find or not, depending on your quality filtering and stuff like that. Bloom, I think, filtered harder than the others, although it would take a lot of detective work to figure out exactly what happened. The Chinese and the Warraby analysis seem to agree more with each other, finding raccoon dog in the Warraby, or Canis in the Chinese, in one particular, the sort of southwest corner of the market, as you mentioned, one particular sample. They were labeled differently, but it seemed like it was the same sample, and positive for SARS-CoV-2. So like what looked very likely to be an infected raccoon dog, but then what does that mean? Did a person infect a raccoon dog? Did a raccoon dog infect a person? I think it just says the virus was there and might well have been in that animal.
It's still more data than supports any other scenario, right? So Gigi, you mentioned China being dishonest and so forth, and that's interpreted by lab leakers as trying to hide a lab leak. But I would say they're very embarrassed that the market is the source, and that shouldn't, as you said, it was illegal to have the markets open. They were closed after SARS-1, correct?
Yes.
And then they reopened?
So after SARS-1, the markets were open. There were a bunch of civet cats there to be tested, and that was how the epidemic was figured out. But in this case, the market was closed, so there were only environmental samples to be taken. And maybe, who knows? Maybe they did take live animal samples, and we just don't know that.
Yeah.
But
I actually asked George Gao that, the former head of the Chinese CDC. He presented on SARS.
All right, so when he says ego, right? So when he says ego, this is what he means right here. Right? This is his ego talking right here. When he says ego, says you're a small echo chamber. First of all, nothing small over here. Let's get that straight. Nothing small. No one knows who you are. Right? The only reason people know you exist now is because you keep chatting in the chat. Had I not said anything, which I put your name in the video. Had I not had I never said anything in regard to you, bro, no one would know who you are. So to say something that's small over here shows your ignorance. That's your ego talking. Secondly, there's no echo chamber. We deal with evidence. We don't deal with your emotionalism. You made this comment twice. So since we small, Nick, listen, bro. Listen. They didn't find patient 0. You talk. All right, let me just deal with you. Look who's saying they found patient 0. First, it was the U.S. The U.S. said that they found patient 0, but I'm going to go to something a little more to read. So okay, so here we go. Here we go. All right, fuck the experts. Fuck what we're listening to right now. We were listening to a group of experts on the subject matter. We're going to say fuck the experts on the subject matter. We're going to go right here, and we're going to listen for 2 minutes.
COVID-19 patients 0 in Wuhan identified, boosting lab leak theory. By Eric Mack. A report based on multiple anonymous sources inside the U.S. government says that researchers working inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Pause. A report based on multiple anonymous sources inside the U.S. government says that researchers working inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology were the first to be infected with the virus that went on to trigger a pandemic and kill millions. The report public cites multiple U.S. government officials interviewed as part of a lengthy investigation saying that Ben Hugh, who led WIV's gain-of-function research on coronaviruses, was among the patient 0s who contracted the SARS-CoV-2 virus in November 2019. This, Chavis, is what he want me to play a video of people saying this shit. Now you see why I won't play the video, Chavis, because I'm going to stop listening to experts to go deal with an anonymous source inside the U.S. government. I'm going to deal with these anonymous sources inside the U.S. government that says something happened in Wuhan, which notice, which way are we going to have this U.S. government? Is they participating or they not participating in providing you information? Then we going back to the gain of function shit. This is why I continue to say that I am not entertaining this type of bullshit. Listen, the letter continues to say, if confirmed, the report was seen to disprove the long-held theory that the virus was not accidentally leaked from the Wuhan coronavirus lab, but instead emerged from a nearby wet market where exotic meats like pangolins are sold. If confirmed. The so-called lab leak theory was raised in the early days of the pandemic, but was often dismissed by officials, experts, and members of media. Adding to the confusion, conflicting reports over the past few years have supported either the lab leak hypothesis and the narrative of the virus emerging zoonotically from the wet market. This is why I said you have to study viruses. When a source was asked how certain they were that these were the identities of the 3 WIV scientists who developed symptoms consistent with COVID-19 in the fall of 2019, we were told 100%. It reads, representatives from the WIV did not immediately respond to the request for the comment. I don't need to play the video. They're regurgitating a political talking head point that people continues to say from these anonymous U.S. government officials. The fuck is we talking about? So I'm supposed to listen to some U.S. government officials, or I'm gonna listen to some experts who actually studying, who participated. You see these 2 motherfuckers over here have been dealing with this since the start of the pandemic and actually worked on the damn virus. Researching it, breaking it down, looking at the sites, understanding the virus, how it's doing this, that, and the third. They are a part of that process. So I ain't gonna listen to these 3 people over here. 4, right? Because this dude is just talking about the intelligence letter, levels of confidence. But these 4 people, I ain't gonna listen to these 4 people. I'm gonna go listen to some motherfuckers on Capitol Hill who've been arguing about this shit and trying to blame China for this shit for so long because they need someone to blame for 1.2 million people dying randomly.
A couple of months ago, and this had all just come out, and he said we tested animals.
Chavis, I am not going to share, and I really don't want you to share the shit that I shared to you the other day. I do not want you to share the shit that I shared to you the other day. I am holding that information, and someone wants to debate the subject matter, and then I can provide that information and get it the fuck up out of here because it adds to the other line of evidence that we have, which supports the position that we have been taking since the beginning. So I don't want to share that because if I share that, then motherfuckers got that information and now they can avoid dealing with trying to debate or argue the subject. Who cares how many people is viewing it, bro? You don't know how many people going to view the video, copy it, download it. I don't care nothing about none of that. Who cares about that? Just listen, Jalel, I don't know where you get off thinking because you have 300 people in the chat or 500 people in the chat that means something. That doesn't mean shit. I am not like everybody else, bro. I'm not. I don't need 200, 300, or 1,000 people listening to my shows. I don't. The church has, listen, the church has, what is it? Billions of people that still go to church on Sundays. The conscious community ain't even got 1 million people. It ain't even got 100,000, really. There's not 100,000 people in the conscious community. But in the US, it's got millions of people that go to church on every Sunday. So you know what the church can say about the conscious community? You're a small echo chamber. You ain't got nothing but about 20,000 people. You're a small echo chamber. Despite the information that's in the community, or what information can refute that of the majority, so your logic is fucked up. It ain't about the crowd, bro. It's about the information. Can you falsify data? Can you falsify the info? I don't care how big, I don't care how many people in here. Can the information be falsified? Can you falsify what I'm saying? If you can't falsify what I'm saying, then hey, I don't do this shit for views, bro. I do this shit to properly edify and educate people. I don't do this for views. If I was doing shit for views, bro, I would monetize the goddamn Mossy Warrior Clan channel. Get everybody to vote on monetizing the Mossy and Kofi Pie Side channel, and we just get paid off y'all motherfuckers by making content. But we ain't just making content. We're edifying and educating and sharing information with our people. What the fuck you don't get, nigga?
We couldn't find any that were positive. And so I asked him after the talk, well, that sounds very important. Could you tell us, how many animals you tested? Where did you test them? When did you test them? And he sort of filibustered for 5 minutes and then stopped without answering the question.
Well, it should be pointed out.
Whoa. Who filibustered? Do it one more time, Doc.
The market was closed, so there were only environmental samples to be taken. And
pause. Bruh said this. You are not giving out formative information. According to who? Who cares if I'm cussing or not? The information that I provide is beyond formative. You said that I'm not giving out formative information. So listen, if you go to the description of the video, who cares? Who cares if I cuss or not? Who cares? It's my channel. I can cuss if I want to. But the information, can you refute the information, or are you worried about me cussing? The information is solid on the channel. Despite if I cuss or not. People act like adults don't cuss. I don't have to get up here and do it your way. I don't have to do none of that. What are you talking about? Because I'm cussing. Forget the fact that I'm cussing. Is the information right, wrong, or inexact? You say I'm not giving out informative information. Prove it. Show me. I published a book. That's informative information. Have you published a book? Have you tried to properly edify the black people? Huh? Since you're so worried about the black community, what have you published that the black community could benefit from? Forget YouTube. You can't do nothing. Do it. We waiting on you. No, I'm not bringing this dumbass up here, and he know that. That's why he's still in the chat.
Maybe, who knows? Maybe they did take live animal samples, and we just don't know that. Yeah. But it's.
Bruh, I can sound any way that I want to sound. I can yell, cuss, fuss. I can do all of that. I'm not here to please you or anyone else. Once again, you're deflecting, right? You're deflecting from the information. It's similar to this, right? If I go and all right, so I've never seen you at any event, any black community event ever. Out of the events that I've been to, I've never seen you there. So when I go to these events, right? Although people get up there and they say the politically correct thing and they don't cuss or say certain things of that particular nature, cool, fine and dandy, right? But guess what? You will hear some cuss words in front of black people when they're up there presenting information. As a matter of fact, on several occasions, Asar cusses. Several, live and on YouTube. So miss me with that whole thing about the cussing thing, brother. Because I don't cuss in my published work. I can. It's been done before by people. I do believe, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the great Amos Wilson said a cuss word in a book before. I got to figure out which one it was, one of the smaller books on psychology. Or fuck out of here, though.
I actually asked George Gao that, the former head of the Chinese CDC. He presented on SARS-CoV-2 at a meeting in Spain a couple of months ago, and this had all just come out. And he said, we tested animals, we couldn't find any that were positive. And so I asked him after the talk, well, presented on SARS-CoV-2 at a meeting in Spain a couple of months ago, and this had all just come out. And he said, we tested animals, we couldn't find any that were positive. Presented on SARS-CoV. I actually asked George Gao that, the former.
George Gao. Who is George Gao? Run it to us, Doc. Who is George Gao?
I actually asked George Gao that, the former head of the Chinese CDC. He presented on SARS.
The former head of China's CDC. Let me show y'all who he's talking about. George Gao. Let me show y'all who he's talking about. George F. Gao, also known as George Fu Gao, is a Chinese virologist and immunologist. He serves as a doctor of the Chinese Center of Disease Control and Prevention from August to July, and as a dean in the Xavier Medical School of the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences. So this is who he's having a conversation with. Watch what he is talking about. Come on, Doc. Run it back, Doc.
Former head of the Chinese CDC. He presented on SARS-CoV-2 at a meeting in Spain a couple of months ago, and this had all just come out. And he said, we tested animals, we couldn't find any that were positive. And so I asked him after the talk, well, that sounds very important. Could you tell us, how many animals you tested? Where did you test them? When did you test them? And he sort of filibustered for 5 minutes and then stopped without answering the question.
Well, it should be pointed out that very close to the beginning of 2020, he published a paper in a China CDC journal saying the market was the origin, and that's why we shut it down. And then, of course, that story changed. But I think his first reaction as an epidemiologist was the correct one, and he was forced to change, and that's what he's doing to this day.
But did he have sequences that statement was based on, or just that's what he thought happened?
Well, he might have. They weren't published, but the article, which is still online, you can see the conclusion. And I've heard from others that he told them the same thing. So, there's obviously a desire to change the narrative, and that can feed into both scenarios, unfortunately. Right?
Yeah, I think people are fearful in China and don't want to get in trouble with the senior leadership.
Well, we're not going to find out any more information. I mean, our opportunities to get more information are gone. So, I mean, there was a World Health Organization visit. There was that whole process. Maybe people weren't as satisfied with it as they wanted it to be. Maybe it wasn't as informative as they wanted it to be. But that kind of diplomatic, quasi-scientific investigation visit process was as good as it was going to get, and it could have gone on for a lot longer, but because of people being outraged about it, the Chinese did not see a value in cooperating, and so I don't think we're going to see any more of that.
Yeah, and if I may interject too, that this COVID origins isn't the only thing that China will obfuscate and lie about. They were presented in open source intelligence of aerial satellite photos of basically concentration camps for the Uyghur minority, and they no, those are education camps, and we're not hoarding people up. And then you show them the picture, and are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? And so that's something too that's to be.
I thought you were going to mention the balloons.
Oh yeah.
So you need to explain the balloons now.
The satellites,
Oh, those balloons, yes.
Yeah.
Those ones, okay.
Probably one hovering above us now.
Susan, we had more information in terms of animals for SARS-1, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it was found in civet, I think raccoon dogs, and maybe even some other animals in that market. So that's why it seems like that would be the default assumption or presumption that that's what happened again, because it clearly happened the first time.
So the market for SARS was allowed to stay open longer, and
She probably knows, I don't know exactly, but they did get the animals, right?
Yeah, they did an investigation and were open with the world about what was happening there. But I think, one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is how much money goes into the illegal wildlife trade. And so the estimates are really, the error bars are huge, but estimates in China alone, the illegal wildlife trade have ranged from like 7 or 8 to $75 billion a year. So that's more than the US beef industry. That's a lot of money and a lot of like gravity for anyone to step in the way of. And so, I think one possible reason why the market was closed was because, people did not want to get in trouble because what they were doing was against the law. And there was a lot of people who let that activity go on because of the profit motive. So, there's a lot of other reasons why people could be lying or could act the way they do that are not because of a laboratory leak.
are the markets still closed as far as we know?
I thought I heard that they were open again.
Do you think they should be closed permanently?
I don't think that you can close something that people really want so much that they will go to illegal lengths to get it. But I think that there are safer ways to sell animals than the way that they were doing it. And if you could regulate that industry and make sure that the animals were more healthy and that the butchering was done in a much separate place than where they were kept, and all the things, the WHO has very detailed guidance on how to operate a wet market.
And maybe you could sample them for coronaviruses too, right? Yeah. Make sure before you bring them in that they're...
And that market sells other things as well, right? I was in that market, and I don't remember if I was there in 2016, and I can't remember if I saw those animals, but there were other things being sold. It was a really...
You mean live things?
No, other non-live things.
Like cell phones?
No, like fruits and vegetables. It's a big market. It's sort of like Reading Terminal with the addition of the civet sales.
That was actually what really got me focused on it. Was the WHO report that people were upset about because it said that a laboratory leak was very unlikely. I'm reading, kind of, it was sort of interesting, informative, but on page 98 of this 120-page report, there was a paragraph about how there was no illegal activity that was found in the market. And even though illegal animals had at one point been noted to have been present in that market, it was not the case that there were illegal animals there in 2019. And I read that and I was like, oh, for crying out loud. Like there's no political leader anywhere in the world, I would think, that would say that there was no illegal activity going on at the market. I'm just trying to imagine, the mayor of Philadelphia saying, there's no illegal activity going on in the public market.
Sure. So David, back to you. I want to understand how the FBI works. You can not answer any of these. So the FBI stays in the US, or would it go to China and try and figure out things?
Yeah, the FBI is in, I think, 64 different countries at embassies.
Oh, okay.
So they're very limited, though. They have no law enforcement powers. They're basically in the embassy, and it's more of a liaison function. Unlike China, who was recently in the New York Times had opened up 100 police departments in foreign countries, including New York, that were basically set up to harass Chinese nationals in the United States to try to get them to come back to China or harass them in other ways. And they denied that it was a police department until in one of the countries, they actually had a picture of the sign, and in Chinese it said Chinese police. And then the next day, miraculously, the sign was changed to say Chinese Tourist Help Station. And actually, two people in New York were indicted and arrested for cooperating with the Chinese police department that they had in Manhattan. And it was a big operation, too.
So the FBI could have been in China at the embassy during this investigation.
But they would not be allowed to go out and look at any of that stuff. They would basically be festooned around the embassy, within 20 miles, where they're not allowed to venture out.
So I'm trying to understand what kind. So you said they monitor chatter, right? The talking that goes on, and try and glean something from that.
Yeah, there could be, it depends on what systems are in place. Countries spy on each other all the time. It's a game that's been going on for centuries, or if not millennia.
Sure.
So there could be something they gleaned from that. There could be human sources that someone defected who knew somebody and says, oh, XYZ. So that's something that could be a potential of potential intelligence value as well.
So from your vantage point, do you have an opinion about the origin of SARS-CoV-2?
I think it probably happened from an animal to a human, and probably was not in a lab in China. But I don't know that 100%, just been told all the cards are on the table.
Okay. How important is it to sort this out? Or will it be possible to do that?
I'd be very surprised if it can ever be figured out. I mean, it might be possible to find viruses that are in bats in Southern Asia that are still closer to SARS-CoV-2 and make it seem more likely. But unless there's like specimens from patients really early that are analyzed really thoroughly from Wuhan, it doesn't seem very likely there's going to be any clear answer. I suppose there could be a smoking gun in favor of the lab leak hypothesis. You find all the intermediate DNA constructions in somebody's freezer or something like that, and that maybe that could be a fully definitive answer, but it seems highly unlikely for the reasons we've been discussing.
What kind of evidence would you want to pinpoint the origin?
Well, I mean, I think Rick is right. If you could find it in the lab, then it would suggest that as unlikely as it is.
Well, that's what the lab leakers would say, that it's there and we just can't find it, and that's their story.
Well, that's sort of the Bigfoot argument.
Yeah, but the epidemiology doesn't support that.
But let's say, as we all likely think,
He doesn't support that.
What don't support it?
Well, that's sort of the Bigfoot argument.
Yeah, but the epidemiology doesn't support that.
Hypothesis. You find all the intermediate DNA constructions in somebody's freezer or something like that, and that maybe that could be a fully definitive answer, but it seems highly unlikely for all the reasons we've been discussing.
What kind of evidence would you want to pinpoint the origin?
Well, I mean, I think Rick is right. If you could find it in the lab, then it would suggest that as unlikely as it is.
Well, that's what the lab leakers would say, that it's there and we just can't find it, and that's their story.
Well, that's sort of the Bigfoot argument.
Yeah, but the epidemiology doesn't support that.
But let's say, as we all likely think, it originated in the market. So how do we prove that beyond what we have already? Get more samples from animals that are consistent with an early spread?
Well, the metagenomic samples were several weeks after the inferred introduction. So if you could get earlier samples and match those up with something you found in a cave and find a patient who had been in the cave and then been in the market, I don't know.
Well, finding in the bat, a really similar one in the bats would at least cut out the thing about it being manufactured, I think, if you could find really close ancestor. But that wouldn't really prove how it got into the market.
I found a quote by Jeffrey Sachs, who unfortunately is my Columbia colleague. He said the NIH and the Wuhan Institute collaborated to make SARS-CoV-2.
It's ridiculous.
Collaborated. Collaboration is already difficult. I find it when people say scientists all agreed to conspire about this, it's laughable because we can't even agree on anything. Right?
But does he say beyond that, I mean, beyond that fantasy, how you need some detail if you're going to say something like that.
Well, maybe they're thinking about the Peter Daszak example where in the grant update or final report, they showed some chimeric viruses where they had taken like naturally occurring viruses.
So again, Jalel wants me to listen to two dudes on a YouTube channel who are not virologists, epidemiologists, or immunologists to hear them talk about the so-called informants inside the U.S. government that is telling people that certain people mentioned X, Y, and Z. So negate the experts who are actually working on the virus, right? These 4 people that are working on the virus, forget them that are here at this symposium dealing with this whole notion of a lab leak, right? You see the title of the show, From Nature, Not a Lab. They're telling you definitively, according to evidence, circumstantial amount of evidence. He wants me to set that aside to say, okay, let me give these dudes an opportunity to say whatever it is that they're going to say. And they're regurgitating something that some political government officials are leaking to people for headlines. And they get paid to leak this shit. But that ain't even being discussed.
Had taken their spikes and put them into a known virus to ask what the infectious potential was. You could say this is an outrageous smoking gun. You could also say this is a perfectly reasonable thing to try to understand the infectious potential of these viruses. Right. It's a standard kind of experiment that's been done many times, and this is pretty benign, though probably worth being careful about.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think those are important experiments to figure out what the potential to.
So once again, ladies and gentlemen, the brother that should have been listening the entire time hits us with another dumbass question. Here it is. He says, again, another stupid question. Did they find a host animal? Brother, when I pulled up the source that specifically, and he named the source. He said raccoon dog a while ago. In the market. They talked about the market and the animals that were being sold in the market. You sit here and ask this question after they didn't say at the fucking raccoon market, and I've shown this on the screen. This is why I can cuss on my channel. I don't claim for this to be twiv. This science with Sean. We gonna kick science and we gonna talk shit. And we gonna get some hip hop and we gonna get some whatever we want to call rap these days. We're gonna get all of that. We gonna thug it out. But we gonna present evidence. We're not gonna present our opinions. They named several. Even in the WHO documents, the WHO documents led us, right, to that 97, 90, 96, 97, 98% match of bats that was similar to. Then we had the other animals of the wildlife sold, and we found the SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? We found SARS-CoV-2 in the Wuhan market, in certain areas of the market where animals had shown up to test positive for the virus being present there. And you sit here and ask us, did they find the host animal? Lord have mercy. Go, bro, listen, go back to church. Get out of the conscious community and go back to church.
To infect humans is of the bat viruses, and that's why those experiments were done.
It comes back to how little the public really.
No, we don't lose. We don't lose. You lose because he vaccinated. Hold up. Where you go, Chavis? He vaccinated. Let me keep going. I don't know if he is or he is. I can't confirm. She vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. Juju vaccinated. A lot of people that tune into the show vaccinated. So how do we lose? How do we lose? How we lose? He vaccinated. There you go. We all vaccinated. How we losing? Look. Told you. one stupid comment after another stupid comment after another stupid comment after another stupid comment. And then we ask one question: where is your evidence that says the vaccine doesn't do nothing for you? It don't stop the spread. What does it do? The vaccine does stop the spread of infection. It protects against hospitalizations and death and stops the spread of infection. What are you talking about? See, once again, you don't know. So let's continue so I can wrap this shit up, man.
Really knows about what goes on in virology and stuff like that. It can look like a smoking gun if you don't know much about the subject.
And again, sometimes when you put together pieces of virus.
Woo! Bars. Jalel, listen to what he says very closely because he's talking to you. He said, you hear some information that may sound like a smoking gun. It's because you don't know anything about the subject matter. Say it again, Doc.
We're done.
It comes back to how little the public really knows about what goes on in virology and stuff like that. It can look like a smoking gun if you don't know much about the subject.
And humans is of the bad viruses, and that's why those experiments were done.
Clip this.
It comes.
Clip this. Where you at? Bar reloaded. Clip this part right here. I'm finna play. Get your shit ready. Clip this part.
These are important experiments to figure out what the potential to infect humans is of the bad viruses, and that's why those experiments were done.
It comes back to how little the public really knows about what goes on in virology and stuff like that. It can look like a smoking gun if you don't know much about the subject.
And again, sometimes when you put together pieces of viruses,
you gotta clip what he just said. You gotta clip what he just said, because this is the truth. If all truth ain't the truth, nothing but the truth, so be it. He just left us with the reason why dude in the chat saying what he's saying.
We're done.
It comes back to how little the public really knows about what goes on in virology and stuff like that. It can look like a smoking gun if you don't know much about the subject.
And again, sometimes when you put together pieces of viruses, you get
it can look like a smoking gun if you don't know anything about the subject. But when you know something about the subject, that ain't no smoking gun. That's what we've been saying this entire time.
Junk doesn't always work. You know, it doesn't. You can't fit it. That's why I was surprised what you said about polio recombination, that it could do it with very non-homologous viruses.
You know, it's interesting. In some cases, polio recombination happens very well in the intestine, but not in cells and culture. You can't get it to work there. So, but this brings up something else I wanted to talk about, and that is, this is all. I mean, even though we all agree that a lab origin is highly unlikely, still it's being used because these kinds of experiments got the label gain of function. Now gain of function is a dirty word, and it's being used to push back and regulate. You may have heard that in Florida that you can't do gain of function experiments any longer, as if the governor knows what that means even, right?
So how do they define it? So
seems unlikely.
Apparently the old PPP, the NSABB pandemic potential, those before the broader definition. So I'm sure you've been thinking about the gain of function issue. Tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, so for the people who have not had to pay attention to this, every detail of this, gain of function was a term that came about when over 10 years ago, when people were studying H5N1 and trying to study the transmissibility of it and what makes it transmissible, and if there was some change that could happen that would make it transmissible in mammals. So it's extremely lethal when it does get into a mammal, but thankfully doesn't spread. So what do we need to be worried about if we see it evolving in the wild? What are the mutations that we really need to worry about? And it got termed this like gain of function experiment, that this gain of transmissibility or pathogenicity was really what they were worried about. And but the term gain of function has spread and gotten wider over the years, and there have been some attempts to make it refined. So that's the enhanced pandemic pathogens of pandemic potential, EPPP. And it falls into other research called DIRC, which is dual use research of concern. There's like an acronym every 5 minutes. But basically, the gain of function research, people want you to. This is research that is scientifically meritorious. So, and then it goes to this other committee to decide whether you should do it. And there are rules about what you should or should not do, but people can't really define it. And that's really the problem here, is like, if you're a scientist and you want to study the transmissibility or pathogenicity of a virus, how do you know when you've crossed the line into something that you need to submit to the NIH and get approval for? And my problem with this is that I don't think you're going to be able to really identify what puts you into this different regulatory category. The National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity has said that you need to submit experiments that you can reasonably anticipate will create this quality, but I don't think that you can reasonably anticipate what the results of your experiments are going to be. And so I worry that this regulatory morass is going to discourage scientists from even asking these questions, which are super important. I think it'll discourage students from going into the work and wanting to pursue it. And this pandemic killed a lot of people. We need to figure this out. Like, we need to get better at fighting the next virus, whether it's the next pandemic, whether it's flu or another coronavirus or something else. And so we need to study transmissibility and pathogenicity so that we can get better at fighting these things. So that's one of the reasons why over the last years, scientists have, lab leakers have added to this, that we need to get better at biosafety, but often what they mean is that we need to shut it down. Yeah. And that's my concern. So I want to do something that's more positive and proactive. And just thinking about, there was a time in science where was a lot.
All right, real quick. So again, he says, I see this is where the pseudos live and Garfield channel. Why would Garfield channel be even associated with a place where there's dance? I don't know what Garfield does over there, but guess what? Garfield's vaccinated. Right? He's vaccinated. You calling someone pseudo, but you can't demonstrate that they're pseudo. So where's your evidence for them being pseudo? If you're saying this is where pseudos are, demonstrate with evidence. Demonstrate with evidence. Don't talk us to death. Demonstrate with evidence. Okay? Because that's what it requires to have a discussion with me. Evidence. Because your ass is pseudo. If I show them all the TikToks and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube videos you seen, not one scientific journal, not one scientific source, not one scientific article, they would have determined it. But guess what? Because you're in the chat and you're in your feelings and I'm putting your stuff on the screen, the people who catch the replay and the people that are in the chat can determine who's the pseudo. I'm gonna wrap this up. I don't want to play the whole thing out, but I'm gonna let her get her point out.
A lot of fear about work that was done in the lab in the recombinant DNA days.
Sure.
And there was a big conference held in Asilomar where scientists got together to figure out like what is and what is not allowed and what kinds of experiments should be done, what kind of safety mechanisms we need. And a lot of the mechanisms that were built then, we still have now with institutional biosafety committees. And so we at Hopkins and with others, including Susan and whoever wants to be involved with this, want to do a repeat of that only not having it only white men from the US, like in a Asilomar, but to have an international meeting of virologists and biosecurity experts and biosafety experts to say, like, what kind of rules do we need for this kind of work? Because the rules that are coming from NSAB or from the governor of Florida are not going to really help.
Problem with NSAB is they're actually hijacked by 4 or 5 individuals who you and I both know, who are very vocal and who insist, for example, that virologists cannot regulate their own experiments because we're too conflicted. And so people who don't have any expertise have to do it.
Well, I mean, you can't regulate if you don't have expertise, and it can't be the only people that you have involved. I mean, you want to have people who have different perspectives. You want to have people who are lawyers and ethicists and biosafety experts, but you can't do a good job in figuring out what the rules of the road are going to be if you don't involve the people who are driving. And so that's why we are starting this, we want to have this, we've been calling it the 555 Penn Initiative, because the meeting is going to be held at the 555 Penn building that Hopkins now owns in DC. But we're building this to try and have a positive, like, what should this work be regulated about, and how can we bring all these people together?
I think that's great to grab the initiative and take it away from the naysayers, essentially, which is what's happening. And you're going to these, you guys are both going, is that right?
Sure. I'm not invited, but I...
No, everybody, absolutely.
It seems like there's really a role for sort of simple educational activities, reminding people of high school biology and how it bears on thinking about, basics of SARS-CoV-2 infection and spread, lab leak hypothesis argument, everything like that. Maybe a series of videos for, for non-specialists to try to educate them in these matters.
I think it's important for everyone to get involved, because in my feeling, this is a threat to the future of science, because you're going to be increasingly regulated. And I think it's in part politically motivated, because I'm sure the governor of Florida knows he will get votes by opposing gain-of-function experiments, just as he opposed masking and vaccinations, right? It gets votes. That's in the end and if wearing a mask got votes, he would be in favor of that. So right now the climate is over half of the US believes this virus came from a lab. So politically, it's going to benefit you to support that. And I think this is the danger we face, and we're going to be more and more regulated unless we say something.
But there's also this, Gigi and I've talked about this, the scientific regulation of people thinking that we could do all this with pseudoviruses or with informatics or with in silico. And I think that's limited. I mean, you can learn a lot from those kinds of approaches, but to sort of cut off working with the real pathogens is a huge mistake.
One thing that probably deserves to be more widely known is the Ebola virus vaccine is a constructed thing where you put the envelope of Ebola into a different virus. And that's
a gain of function, right?
Yeah, you could call that gain of function. You could call it a highly effective vaccine against a very scary virus.
Well, I think more education is important. That's why we do TWIV, but unfortunately we don't reach enough people. So everyone needs to do something who's involved in science. A scientist, I at a meeting recently, I met someone who was on the NSABB, and they've recently voted to expand the organisms that are being regulated, which is really unfortunate. I said, why did you do that? And he said, I'm just too busy. I don't have time. And that's what we all get into. We're all busy and we don't have time to spend on other activities, but in fact, they're all our activities, right?
I mean, I don't have a problem, I think it's a mistake to think that, that regulation would be harmful, but it's a matter of what regulation you're talking about, and it has to be something that makes sense, because if it doesn't make sense, people are just going to work around it, or they're not going to do it at all. And so, I think people want to have accountability. They want to do things safely. They want to do things ways that they are being careful, but you can't stop the work. Otherwise, we're just going to not be ready for what comes next.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. If you put too much of an obstacle up, especially with experiments that are harmless, and it's only because the people proposing the regulations don't understand the experiments
It's
that,
very easy to be on the rhetorical level with this kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Like,
yeah.
well, you're going to create a devastating virus that could kill millions. And it's like, well, I don't really know. I'm just like working on these mice things here. So you know, it's not really, I mean, I don't know how you can,
Yeah.
it has to be boring and technical, I think, to work.
And who's going to make these decisions? Who's going to decide what's okay and what's not okay? I mean,
Well, that's a good question. You know, ultimately, it's NIH who provides the funds, right? So right now, the NSABB guidance applies to NIH-funded research. So if you're doing it in a company, you don't have to abide by it. Isn't that
Well,
correct?
the NSAB wants to change it so that
Uh-huh.
if you're doing that for a company, then yeah, it would also fall under this regulation. But it's not a done deal. That was draft recommendations, and over the next several months, I expect that there will be opportunities for people to say what they think about those draft recommendations to the government. We're not at a point where there are regulations yet.
Okay, one more time. He says, show the people what I sent you, right? He says, show the people what I sent you. Again, I read the article. I don't need to show anyone anything, Jaleel. I read the article. This is the same. The article said the same exact thing. Look, let me show y'all. Let me show y'all. Okay. This is the problem that I have. He wants me to stop my show showing evidence for this right here. What he want me to show y'all? He want me to show y'all this video right here. This video from the Hill. This is what he wants me to show y'all. This video from
Summer at Racetrack.
From the Hill. This is what he wants. Now look, in the description of this video, there's no source. But this is what he wants me to show you. He wants me to show you this.
Infected COVID.
Who is dude? Who is this dude? He's a journalist. Hold on. Let's go to this dude. Public. First people sickened by COVID-19 were scientists at Wuhan Institute of Virology, U.S. government sources. The article that I read to you, ladies and gentlemen, is the same. Listen, look. It just comes from Forbes. It's saying the same shit. You don't believe me? I'm finna pull the article up. I don't need to watch a video when I can go read the article. So let's go look this article up. First people to contract COVID. No, first people sickened. Sickened by COVID were Chinese scientists. Now, I'm going to go to my share thread, and it's the same information up and down the pipeline. Why do I need to watch a video when I can read the article? Why? Who is this guy? Right? Who is this guy? What? Now, there's his name, the first person in it, Michael Schellberger, right? So I'm going to take you back to StreamYard, which should be showing on the screen. Michael Schellberger. This is the person that they are interviewing on the Hill. This gentleman right here. Michael Schellenberger. Don't believe me? Let's go back to the video. This is Michael Schellenberger. He's the author. His name is right here in the video. Who is Michael Schellenberger? Is an American author and former public relations professional whose writing has focused on the intersection of politics, the environment, climate change, nuclear power, as well as more recently, he believes progressivism is the link to homelessness, drug addiction, and mental illness. He's the co-founder of the Breakthrough Institute and the California Peace Coalition. He is also the founder of Environmental Progress. Okay? Is he a virologist, epidemiologist, or immunologist? No, he is not any of the above, as I stated. So why am I listening to Michael? Why am I listening? Look, he's just a journalist himself, author of Apocalypse Never. He's just a journalist. He ain't even just a journalist, he's just an author. Why am I listening to this? This is a political website. There's no source in here talking about partisanship. You said that I won't play the video, brother. Why do these are people's opinions. I don't need to play no video. I don't need to play no video of these people. It's their opinions, Jalil. This ain't research. This is not research. None whatsoever. There's nothing substantial here. So the article that I read is saying the same shit that this dude just said, bro. Why am I watching this video? Why am I not engaged in this video with 4 experts in the field on the subject matter who all study viruses, and more specifically, these 2 have been in the root of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. They have been studying this. Why am I dealing with that, bro? Why? Explain to me how, make this make sense to me why I'm finna do that. Huh? Tell me why. Why I'm gonna stop watching these experts to go listen to a news channel. Please tell me. Right. Shit. In better news. He don't have a science article or a journal. He doesn't. And what's bad is the show notes from this show that I'm showing right here. He's got show notes. Check this out. Show notes for this episode. So everything they discuss in this episode is the show notes. Then he has a Discord, additional information, and everything else. Of course, you can take a week-to-week course on virology with Cracking Yellow. A virologist teaching you virology online. So no, I'm not playing the damn video. The fuck I'm finna play the video for, and it don't have no sense. Makes no sense. Why would I go listen to 3 people? 2 of them are journalists, one's an author of some controversial books. and say, the hell with the experts. I'm gonna go deal with these news people. I'm gonna get my evidence from news people who ain't got the goddamn evidence. They're reporting some anonymous shit from government officials. The same shit that I said in the Forbes article, some anonymous government officials are claiming that 3 people are patient zero. Yada, 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 yada. Come on, yo. You tripping with no motherfucking math. Listen, man, it's been real in the field. I got shit to do. I might be back on my seat with some real shit. So I appreciate everybody tapping in. Like the show, share the show, tell a friend. We live, catch the replay. Jalel, you ain't doing no research, bro. You ain't even having an intelligent conversation. You have set yourself apart from not understanding what the hell science is saying. It's pathetic.
Help! 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 Killer Mikey Gucci. Kid, we going out on this motherfucker.
Anytime that we in VIP, they say the zoo in town. Turkey seller fences going wild, yeah, doing clowns. Monkey niggas talking shit, I can make them see. Have my Africans eat his face like he's some bush meat. Animals, we animals, nah, we ain't playing fair. Dog show, got 20 pretty bitches prancing over here, sweating like a dog, oh, and I need my H2O. I'ma grab your ass and keep you good before the night is over. We gon' need about 30 bottles, jungle juice is going on. Sharamo and Rose women, whatever they pouring on. Bite that pill and tranquilize. Now they got that monkey loose. She fuck gorillas, we gorillas, then you and your monkey crew. I'm going down.